So I'll try to keep it really brief and short, and I'll do away with the preamble, because what was the preamble, what I was going to say, was said much more eloquently and more intelligibly by Dr. Ahluwalia, and therefore I'll just start straight with introducing very briefly our two panelists. You have the bios, so I'm not going to read it out, just in the interest of time, and we can get through. But let me just say, Rogério and I have been friends for several years now, and he is part of the furniture of Washington, D.C. He has been at the World Bank and IMF, World Bank and IDB, both executive directors for Brazil. I still didn't find another person who did the same thing. Maybe there are, maybe some of your colleagues, but I don't know. So Rogério, for me, is a person who has institutional knowledge. And therefore, as Dr. Ahluwalia said, that this is a moment in history, or at least something has changed. And my first question to Rogério would be, still don't start answering, is, are we realizing that things have changed? Because yesterday, when I went to a meeting, I heard exactly the same things about climate finance, like blended finance, private sector is going to do this is going to happen, and the multilateral institutions have to step up. Nothing new. So hold that thought, think about it, and I'll come back to you. As I introduce Ridhika, Ridhika is the, by the way, Rogério is, as you said, senior fellow at CEBRI, the Brazilian Institute of International Relations, and he has had a long and distinguished career in public service, so thank you for your service, Rogério. Ridhika came around the same time to DC as I did, and then she took over as the FICCI, head of FICCI of the Washington office, came from London, FICCI London office, and before that was in Paris, and before that was in Sussex. So we had interesting conversations about, at this time it was 2013, if I don't remember, 14, and India was not a big deal in this city at that time. And thanks to Ridhika today, well, we are a big deal. In some ways, the private sector has grown, the presence has grown, and she has moved and is now the head of government relations for the Americas. It is with the S, so it's not only US, but she has her remit of all over Latin America. And one of the persons that we'll turn to speak about the private sector, and I do air quotes because that's what you hear. And as Dr. Ahluwalia said, private sector is, I think, kicking the can down the road, that if we can't do it, the private sector will do it. So Ridhika, I will come back to you with some reflections on what is the private sector doing, or what should it do. But Rogério, let me turn it to you on the first question. Do we, 2 minutes. Do we understand that things have changed? And if so, what are we taking action on?
First of all, let me thank you very much. In 2 minutes, it's going to be a challenge, but thank you for the invitation. I hope let me explain to you before becoming the furniture, and I hope you're saying that I'm a rocking chair at the moment. I have always been. I started my life in the private sector in finance. Then I became an academic development economist. And because I understood finance, I went into the issue that became the part of my life, development finance. And then I had a career in academia, also in the multilateral institutions where I became a rocking chair. and then in 2012, the first time I read a report about climate change that made me shake. It was even more than the science was saying. The report that the World Bank was presenting was really scary. And I came to a conclusion: there's no development without dealing with climate change. Forget about it. But there's one thing that I can say, and that the issue, asking if this is an issue is new or not, development finance has always been about transformation. And what we have in front of us is an enormous task of transformation. What is different in relation to development finance and how it is being dealt in the multilateral institutions? Two things. First, we always thought about transformation about a future. You say, when people say, well, let's go to the moon. Let's go to the moon. This is going to be the future. This is great. This is new. And then you mobilize resources domestically to do that. You engage the private sector, engage think tanks and universities, and move on. With climate change, it's not about the future. That was a very bad start when you're talking to climate finance. It's about avoiding the future. That was a very bad start. I want to delve into that. What I wanted to say is that the second difference is this. Development finance has been always, in some parts, incremental, but you had little jumps. Nothing in the measure and the volume required for the transformation that we need now. So the challenge that we have, and some of that finance would come directly from budget. I mean, the United States, everything. I mean, everything is budget in terms of finance transformation, okay? We can have a long conversation on that. But the size makes it impossible for us to think of that kind of transformation without engaging the private sector. And I hope you're going to talk much better about this than I can, but I want to return to that issue after, if I get another minute.
Yeah, does this work? Yes. So you started by saying, Anit, that you were at a meeting yesterday and you've heard the same things over and over again. Has anything changed? So I'm going to take 30 seconds to repeat everything that you must have heard and then move on to the real stuff. The repetitive stuff that we hear about climate finance is, blended finance is important. Please have grants, loans, equity, debt, all kinds of things put together, which is helpful. The second big message we hear is that every dollar spent in the global south on climate would go a longer distance than every dollar spent in the global north, simply because the requirement in global south is much more, the availability of resources is much more, the renewable energy capacity is much more in global south. Having said all of these things, let's try and see what the private sector is actually doing or intending to do or is able to do or not. And here I'm going to start by saying what Mahindra has been able to do in the past 5 to 6 years. And then I will take you through specific examples of where we've made a difference. So Mahindra is part of the World Economic Forum's group of trust funds. And we are committed with 8 other global companies, the only automobile company in that group, and the only Indian company in that group, which is committed to procuring green steel, 100% green steel for all our auto, farm equipment, whatever, even our solar panels, from green sources of steel. The other few things that we have done is committed ourselves to be completely net zero by 2040. And very happy, that every year we try and report how much progress we've made. We've already gotten to 67% of our target to get to 2040, complete net zero, 100%. Now, having said all these things, getting them out of the way, I think I've earned my monthly salary by putting all these things together. But the real stuff, you said I am also responsible for South America. Here's what happened when I started exploring the opportunities in South America, especially in Brazil. We have a business called Last Mile Mobility, which is electric three-wheelers. And they essentially are being used by, let's say, an Amazon in India for all kinds of deliveries on an electric tuk-tuk. And that product was seen by an Amazon equivalent in Brazil called Mercado Libre, which is an e-commerce company. And they said, we would love to run this on the streets in Rio and Sao, and can we figure this out? Okay, perfect. And we started running pilots. They loved it. We are in a place where we are trying to sort of sell that. The Brazilian bureaucracy is not that easy to deal with. It's been more than a year and a half. Finally, we are in a place where we are like, all right, let's do this. The beautiful story about everything put together in my market entry in Brazil is our last mile mobility business, which we call LMM, has a massive investment from IFC, part of the World Bank. And we started talking to IFC about going to Latin America with their investment. They jumped at it. And then eventually, after 5 months of the conversation, also came back to us and said, hey, we have made an investment in another company in Brazil called Localiza, which is a commercial fleet company. And our mandate for that investment is that Localiza has to deploy 50% of their commercial vehicles on the streets have to be electric. Can you sell your electric three-wheelers to Localiza as well? Now, IFC has an investment in us, IFC has an investment in Localiza, and us is selling that in Brazil to other IFC investments. And then came Uruguay and Paraguay saying, hey, we want it too. So this is how private sector, when it gets into a profit entity or profit making with the intention of going green, happens. With the same intention, we tried to get into the African market, and we are not really getting the response that we should, because there always is a bit of a hesitation where the sovereign comes before the private sector. Now, what I mean by that is, do let me know if I need to stop. What I mean by that is when we get into the Brazilian market, it's private sector talking to private sector with a bit of regulatory issues here and there where the Brazilian government gets involved, issues as customs, duties, and whatnot. But when we get into the African market, we have to first speak to the sovereign, the state entities, the government entities. And that's where a little bit of a confidence bounce happens. That's what I mean when private sector gets into it. And the last thing that I want to say is, at this point, Mahindra has 3 very successfully running electric automobile business. One is electric three-wheelers, electric SUVs, electric pickup trucks, and whatnot. All these businesses have more than $800 million worth of investment from external investors, the likes of OTPP, Temasek, IFC, World Bank, and Asian Development Bank. All of these businesses have investments worth $800 million from these equities or these entities, and is running very successfully.
Thank you, Ridhika. I think that's really a lesson, right? I mean, this is a conglomerate in the Global South with a varied product line. And I'm glad that you're sticking to your 2040 net zero commitment, unlike some big banks and some big oil companies, which have, for a lack of a better word, regressed on their commitments. I think it also shows that in the Global South, there is a corporate culture that probably we are held at a much higher standard. And it's also important for that lesson that you just said, the difference between Latin America and Africa. There is a lot of heartburn that why doesn't Africa get more investment? So some of these lessons, I think, as I tee up the questions, could be from the audience to Ridhika about that. Rogério, let me turn to you. You're from Brazil. You're a man of the world, but still, I think your feet firmly on the ground in Brazil. COP30, Belém, this year is a huge opportunity. The first time that after Rio in 1992, which started in some way the global climate movement, 32 years after Rio, can COP30 become the COP not for Brazil, but for Greater Amazonia, and more importantly, somewhere, and with US pulling out and uncertainty going into the future of what its role would be, can it be a forum where the leaders, big Global South countries, well, I'll say Global South countries, but the leaders, the big leaders, India, Brazil, Indonesia, South Africa, Mexico, and others, can come together and say, we are the COP squad, and we'll take this forward. What do you think?
I think there's no other choice. But I really think that we place too much emphasis on these international meetings and what they are all about. I think that what would be, if you look at the priorities of Brazil COP presidency, there are 9. The first one is climate finance. And that's a reason. I mean, Brazil, even though is a giant, is a gigantic mass. Is a rich country with very poor people and not inequality, and incapacity to mobilize resources domestically for investments that have resulted in an extreme lag when it comes to infrastructure, social and economic infrastructure. So Brazil knows about the problem, which is the problem of climate finance. It's not what we're discussing here, particularly for larger countries. Not here, not specific here. Here is pretty much, but in larger countries, it's about domestic mobilization of resources. Let me tell you 2 differences about climate finance in relation to development finance, just to add something. There's one good difference. I said some bad difference, but one good difference is that we have the technology now. I mean, you have the solutions. The South, the South had developed a significant amount of the technology required to do the transformation. Okay, and that your story tells a little bit the story. I really do not agree with the part on Africa, but we can discuss that. I think that Africa has been traumatized by the fact that every time that there was external financing and investments, it caused they were explored, deprived. There's a sense of mistrust that we have to overcome. And this only the South can overcome, because we can have a conversation about development challenges that no other country can have. I think it takes patience, and you should insist on that. You should insist on that and show that you're bringing, not only mobilizing resources, but you're bringing social and economic development forms of jobs, investments, and so on. I'm sure they'll listen to that, okay? And this is something that we have to insist. Now, the second difference, you have the difference that we have the technology to do this transformation. And this second difference, which I completely forgot, being a rocking chair at my age, I completely forgot. But what I want to insist is this. At the moment, if COP30 is special for me, not only because I love Brazil, of course, but if the issue of climate financial mobilization for transformation is not, Brazil is not capable to pulling out results-oriented solutions, that's too much. Solutions for that, it's like New York. If you don't make it there, you're not going to make anywhere. Brazil has got all the, for being the center of the climate emergency that we live, from having a sophisticated private sector, from having a sophisticated government. If they cannot, and having good partners, and learn from the partners, if they cannot pull it out, no place else will be. Developing countries should be able to give lessons on resource mobilizations to developed countries, not because we are superior or anything, but because we deal with this in the current terms. India has dealt with that, just like Germany had to deal with that with the second phase of the Industrial Revolution. Okay, but what I'm trying to say that we have the only, I think, multilateral solution for climate crisis is unavoidable. And we're going to get there. We can have a whole conversation about that. But if there is a part of the world that can solve the issue of domestic mobilization, technology transfer, private sector talking to private sector, insisting in the conversation, it would be the South, okay? And if in COP30, we cannot, again, pull out this kind of understanding that we're not just excluding the North. We're saying we, the South, can do it. And let's lead this conversation. Then it will be good outcome.
Right. We'll all meet in Belém then, and have. It's difficult to go, but Ridhika, just quickly before we turn it over to the audience, I'm sure there'll be questions. So Dr. Ahluwalia, in his opening remarks and his keynote, said that there's the Baku, but let's say the Belém to Baku roadmap, 1.3T. First of all, I had a hard time figuring out what is B2B 1.3T. It was written in some of the concept note that one of the event invitations I got, and honestly, I didn't know. But it apparently is Baku to Belém 1.3 trillion. Out of that, half of it, as Dr. Ahluwalia mentioned, has to come from the private sector. From the micro example that you gave to the 635 or 650, if my math is correct, how do we get there? Or would we ever for the private sector? 2 minutes, please.
Just by the private sector, of course, it's impossible. But here is what most of the people are talking about as a potential solution to get to that target. The public sector entities or the government or the sovereign, when they put their might and money behind initiatives or projects like this, it helps to get a long gestation period of innovation. A government putting $100 towards a project gives you a long gestation period of 6, 10, 7 years, which helps that entity or that project to have huge amount of innovation. And if the same project, whilst the sovereign or whilst the government is putting their money and their might in it, and the private sector is executing it, they are able to expedite the process of getting to the finish line. And that has always been the beauty of private and public working together. And now we are seeing very successful examples of that coming through in climate initiatives as well, where I think I mentioned to you that almost $800 million worth of investment within the Mahindra Group is only on our electric mobility business. That is automobile and tractors and three-wheelers. All this investment is actually coming from either pension funds or sovereign wealth funds. Like one of them is BII, which is British International Investment Trust, BII. They have made a commitment of $250 million in one of our businesses. And with the intention that if you show us results of it being executed and implemented in the global south with better innovation, more investment would come.
So
right?
It's a leverage that you can.
It is. And that's how I think this particular problem of climate finance is being dealt with, where it is motivation and incentive on both sides.
Great, good. Turning over to, no. Well, nope. Straight to the audience. No. I know him for many years, so he'll not mind. We'll come back, Rogério. We'll come back with the last comment. Any hands? Yes, in the front, the gentleman there, and Dr. Mohan. We'll start from the back because there's a hand at the back with the white sweater, the lady, and then we'll come to the extreme front. Yes, we'll come to that. Yes, ma'am.
Yes. With regards to incentivizing private sector investments in green energy transitions, I would like to ask, which sector would you say, or which industry in India would you say has the most potential in terms of the supply chain stabilities to adopt green energy transitions versus which sector has the most feasibility? In the sense, which sector would have the most impact versus which sector is the most likely to be able to adopt it in the future?
Excellent question. That's for Ridhika. In front here, gentleman. Yes. Young guy. He should be working out.
Thank you, Alden Meyer, E3G. There's a saying that you can pay me now or you can pay me later. And of course, the analysis has shown that every dollar invested in climate resilience and adaptation saves $6 to $10 in loss and damage down the road. And so with Brazil last year, talking to the Brazilians who are doing the G20, they were very frustrated with the central banks, more so than with the finance ministers, and resisting their TF Klima agenda and the need to scale up finance. And of course, we saw the Financial Stability Report, Financial Stability Board reports in January saying that on the current path we're on towards around 3 degrees Celsius, that poses systemic risks to the stability of the global financial system. Why don't the central bankers understand this? They're supposed to be the ultimate hard-headed decision makers. They seem clueless.
I'll come to the central bankers, so I would like both Rogério and Dr. Mohan to answer this. But let's do a quick round here. Ridhika, on the India question.
To answer your question, I think in our experience, the businesses that have more hardware of an investment, I'm not talking about manufacturing. So for example, anything to do with renewable energy, windmills, or even solar panels are seeing the maximum climate finance investments from whether private sector or the sovereign, because that needs a huge amount of push, which is coming from the investments from these entities, and very closely followed by automobile industry, because the transition from ICE to electric, it doesn't need that much of a push in global south as much as it needs in the north, because what we've observed is there needs to be a cultural shift. If I can take 5 seconds to give an example, UK was running very fast towards the transition in comparison to US on electric mobility. And the reason for that was the consumer in the UK, which said, if in the next 5 to 6 years we anyways have to buy an electric vehicle, we want to buy it now instead of investing in a hybrid and then going to an electric vehicle. Whereas in the US, it was like, give us another 10 years. Once you have a proper infrastructure to charge, we will then think about it. Right now, we are good with, the guzzlers and the big trucks. So automobile industry is the second big push for these kind of investments on climate finance.
And also on the global value chains, right?
Correct.
It's got lots of linkages.
Correct.
Great. Rogério, yes, you are. I give you the floor on the question of the central bank. I think that's a very valid question.
Yeah,
right?
let me go. I'm going to go to the central bank.
May I just also say, can you speak to your national development bank, because that's also something which
That is in 3 minutes, right?
Okay, 3 minutes.
Okay, okay, and the beginning of the universe as well. Now let's first of all, thank you so much, because remember I forgot the second difference, big difference, and that relates directly to what you said. When you're talking about development finance, development in general, what you project in the future and say there are certainties there, but the government is going to build the path and is going to bring the private sector on board. This has been the story of how development worked in different parts. Okay, the difference now in transformation is that, and the private sector would resist. Because they say, well, it's too much risk, and so on and so on. The difference now is that there's no uncertainty about climate change. And this is being mainstream in the thinking of the private sector. That's why you have more private sector, slowly, but more private sector interest in that. In the financial market, even more. Why is that? Because the institutional investors, they have, by fiduciary rule, they have to manage their portfolio and diversify it according to the risk. And since the risk of the climate risk is increasing exponentially, just give you insurance. No, the insurance have got to get out of Florida. Okay, if they get out of Florida, where they're going to invest? Okay, this is what is happening. So today I went to an investor meeting, the investors leadership network had a meeting of institutional investors saying exactly like that. We need to diversify our risk, and that is going to result in a significant, unfortunately for tragic reasons, this is going to create a window of opportunity to bring on the private sector. Central banks know that. The problem is that, and they have been working on climate risk in many levels. BIS, BIS, the Bank of International Settlements, has got a significant number of publications that, and central banks, the Brazilian central bank is involved with that. But the problem is that it takes a little bit of the speed of the climate emergency does not match the speed of those institutions adapting to the climate risk and doing the change that they require. They're not long-term thinkers, the institutional investors are, they're short-term results oriented. So you have to have a push in terms of regulation to say, not only you know you need to do that, but you're going to do it for the sake of financial stability. And this is how the central banks have been addressing the issue. Now, the Brazilian National Development Bank we'll talk about in the next one.
Yeah, I think that's a better point because you need something else for that. Dr. Mohan, if I can give you the last word to just wrap it up or just, yeah. Here. The mic.
Thank you. First, a question and then response.
Sure.
The question really is, Ridhika, that I was delighted to. First, let me just say, this is the first discussion on climate change in a long time that I've heard, which is both positive and optimistic. So that's something different. What this discussion. See, that Brazil. See, Brazil and India, always the countries will always have a great future. So my question, Ridhika, I was delighted to hear that Mahindra is doing green steel 100%. And my question is, where from? Because there is no green steel in India. So unless you've shifted all your manufacturing operations abroad, then I'm a little surprised to hear that you're doing all 100% green steel. The second thing that, on the central banks. So first, one comment on this, that look, climate change is a long period thing. It's not something that you do something today, there'll be an impact tomorrow. You do something today, cumulatively, hopefully, it'll improve the situation. So I think is one thing that we need to understand is that on climate change issues, the thing that you're going to keep pressing to do everything that we need to do, but don't have the impression you do something today, it'll have an impact tomorrow. You're talking about hundreds of years, or thousands of years for that matter, actually. And so I think that's something that, yes, something has to be done urgently. That I'm not disputing at all. But I think this has to be kept in mind. On central banks, I don't have that much familiarity with it now, but basically it's to do with regulation, financial regulation, not monetary policy.
Got it. Yep.
Okay?
Agreed.
And financial regulation, the issue sort of is that to the extent that you think that in the financial sector, there will be impact on bad loans, so to speak, or real sector companies going bad because of climate change, you then have to think about what kind of capacities you have to put into financial intermediaries so that they can keep looking at this and what regulatory change you have to make.
Thank you so much. I will, though, just request Ridhika and you to have, we are going to have the reception. So Ridhika, if you could address Dr. Mohan's question. Thank you very much. You've been a very patient audience, and thank you to the panelists. And thank you for the kind words that we wanted to make this into a better, kind of more positive, but also very practical. I think some of the times that we talk about this climate and climate finance, it's all in the air. But with both of them, both Rogério and Ridhika, thank you so much for a wonderful discussion. And I hand it over to Udaibir for a few closing remarks. Thank you, and all the best.
Okay, so let me. I'm not going to make concluding remarks. I was told by Dhruv to try and bring it all together, so that when you guys go, you have some, 3 or 4 things to carry home. Otherwise, right? So first of all, a great sincere gratitude to all the speakers, moderators, and those who are actively asking questions. I was frankly reminded by what somebody that few know about, somebody called Frantz Fanon. He's an Afro-Caribbean economist, philosopher, and such. And he said that each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. And I think and there are lots of young people, so I'm reaching out to them more than to myself. Right? Sorry, I'm not bringing others into the generational gap, but they have to sort of reckon with it, because there's a lot that you heard from us that probably either confuses you or you may be wondering what next. Just to set the context, I think to reflect what I've taken away, it is imperative to consider the broader context of the ongoing spring meetings, because this is a spring meeting seminar. And in that context, 3 messages are loud and clear coming from the IMF at a global level. Huge concerns have been raised on slower global growth, rising global financial stability, a repricing of risk assets, and a massive shift in financial conditions. Now, these things have implications for climate finance. These have implications for funding social sector issues. It has all the stuff that you would like to resolve on the debt side. So I just wanted to put that as a context, as a frame, because it's very critical that overstretched asset valuations or high leverage in household corporate balance sheets world over. This is not United States only. The fund view is very clear that this is happening universally, and there are a number of reasons for it. So I think this, for me, underscored the urgency of this afternoon. I think just as well that a takeaway is when two young think tanks come together in Washington, D.C., there's much more of energy, right? And I think that's one big lesson. I hope that process continues in the future. The compelling keynote from Montek set the sort of the base. He urged us to question the prevailing development paradigm. He prompted us to move beyond the narrow focus to confront the stark realities of what I call contradictions and convulsions of the current global order. He went back to something that he's very familiar with, that many of you in the room may not be, of the SDRM, and just shows that the institutional memory is very strong with a lot of people, and what's being discussed today is not new. It's got some continuity or continuum. He took climate finance and technology as two areas where multilateral approaches are falling short. Clearly, the indication is that trust in multilateralism and trust in the two institutions, which are the primary carriers of their multilateralism, is fraying. The balance sheets are no longer strong enough, and there's public trust, and the biggest shareholder sort of doesn't like them anymore. If you go by the statement made by Treasury Secretary this morning, please read it. It'll lay out what the biggest shareholder is laying out. Commitments are unmet, and as Rakesh pointed out, most of these decisions are still centralized with the advanced economies. So I think there is a big tension between promise, expectation, and delivery on the part of the developing countries. So I heard very clearly that inclusiveness has to come and rhetoric has to move towards results. I had another takeaway in the same context of the architecture, that it is high time that we stop relying on a very tired, old, multilateral muscle memory. It's gone. It's too tired. And probably, these are my words, so I'm taking the liberty of not putting words in the mouth of those who said so, but I think the body needs an urgent change. Seriously, this cannot be done in an incremental manner, otherwise it's already in the hospice, sort of. So what do you need? You need either a reincarnation or you need something else to happen. Another thing which was pretty clear, that the developing countries which are being called fragile or they need help, these are not problems to be managed. I mean, they are possibilities, and we heard a lot of good examples coming up on what's happening at a micro level that clearly shows that there is a lot of promise in the developing countries and a lot of innovation that is going on. The building on all this, another takeaway was that public debt must no longer be looked at as a pure fiscal issue. The landscape is changing, and it's a structural barrier to development. It's a structural barrier to climate resilience and so many things that need to be done on the development agenda. And Dr. Rakesh, reminded us, Dr. Mohan reminded us that the institutions that are dealing with debt issues are age-old problems, but they are reflecting even today the old power dynamics and outdated assumptions, and they need to be changed. And he had some interesting proposals there. Montek's sort of remarks to me highlighted that debt has turned into a drag for climate finance. Climate finance will not, it's fine, Montek. Background music will work. I was just taking your name. that it's a drag on climate finance, and people have to start seeing debt not as debt alone, but it has to be seen for the developing countries conjointly with climate finance and the social issues that were discussed in another session. It has to be somehow viewed as a more integrated framework for financing and funding rather than this for climate, that for debt, and that for health, etc. One of the things that came up in the morning session, which I sort of thought the undercurrent for all the other two, was countries, developing countries, again, are facing some very tough choices. The calculus is very much against them. Pay for debt, provide for social security, or to get money to fund for resilience building, infrastructure, and what have you. And this is by no means an easy task, especially at a time when the IMF projections are that financial conditions are going to be looking worse and worse in terms of accessing funding. Very promising local innovations that came up in the climate panel and the one on the social issues. I thought that, and just borrowing the just analogy from climate finance, the sense I got was that because so much of energy is building up organically, because of the limitations and constraints that countries are facing, and there is no multilateral support or even the bilateral side, and there is a lot more of small, private, public enterprises coming up, innovations coming up, that we need to quickly reframe that not so much as we need generosity from the rest of the world, but more that we need justice from the rest of the world and equity. And I think these are words, but that's very important because up to now the view was, for example, in Washington, I've been here for a couple of decades, and invariably when delegations from Africa used to come, or even Latin America or small countries in Asia, they all, oh my God, we got to help them, so we just need to give them money. The whole thing was they're here to take. I think that thing has changed now. The way I've seen it now is that they're demanding more, and they are questioning many things that are being put on the table as offers, whether they are coming from the bank, the fund, or the treasury. Just some action points before we go. One is that this is my take on what I saw. First, that the public debt and climate finance risk models need to change. They are absolutely, and this is my take, so I apologize, we can have another seminar on this, because the quantum of financing, the availability of financing, these are all going to be a function of how we are going to look at the balance sheet of every country. It's not going to just come because I have a project. And the risk models there are completely way off, and both the bank and the fund are pretty weak at that. The second is the capacity to strengthen and scale up platforms which are South-South or developing country to developing country. That need to be formalized. A lot of people say about it, a lot of people write about it, but frankly, that is one area that needs to be institutionalized in some concrete way so that you can actually go. And this is a good example of a small beginning with a very different community, but the fact that we had the World Bank in the morning in a different context means that there is a lot that one can do, whether it's BRICS or it's just in Africa or it's ASEAN, it doesn't matter. But I think we need to bring those platforms together. And my last sort of takeaway is that we need to move from reactive to preemptive debt frameworks. Right now, it's all very reactive. And the more we move towards a preemptive framework, not just for developing countries or poor countries, but also for the advanced countries, I think the world going forward will be better off. So with those, one more takeaway. Old wine in new bottle or new wine in wine bottle means we need to go and have some drinks. Right? Thank you.